With the election in less than 2 weeks, what will candidate Joe Biden's final pitch be, and how will progressives seek to hold a potential Biden administration accountable? Joining me now to discuss is a man you might recognize, former presidential candidate, Senator Bernie Sanders. Welcome back, sir.
Great to be with you, Crystal.
Absolutely. So I actually wanted to start with the stimulus negotiations happening right now in the Senate and with the House and the White House. I know back when it was the CARES Act, you urged pragmatism. You said, listen, this isn't a bill that has everything that I want in it, but people need help, so let's move forward with this. Do you think that Democrats should embrace the $1.8 trillion package that Mnuchin and the White House have put forward?
Well, it's not just a number, 1.8 or 2.2 or whatever it is. It is what is in the bill. And I am concerned about a slush fund that the Trump administration would have within that bill. I am very concerned that when we have millions of people who have lost their jobs, they desperately need that $600 supplement to their unemployment. They need that $1,200 check. They need health care. They need to be able to pay their rent. So the devil is in the details in terms of what is in the bill. But I will also tell you, I think it is really pathetic that you have Mitch McConnell, who today is saying, well, I and 20 other Republicans, we don't want to go forward with anything substantive. We're not going to do it.
Yeah, I think that's correct. Just to push you a little bit on that. So what is in the deal, as far as we understand it, is instead of the $600 unemployment plus up, it would be $400. It would be another round of checks. That corporate liability shield that Republicans have been very anxious to get is in there. I guess the concern is, do you think that after the election, there will be another opportunity to get a big stimulus like this? You already have Republicans dragging their heels, especially in the Senate, while there is a lot for them to benefit electorally from passing aid to Americans. And as you know, you've got 8 million Americans who have slipped into poverty since the end of the CARES Act. You've got rent piling up, bills piling up, utility bills, electric as we head into winter. How can we get help to people?
And on it goes. Crystal, all that I can tell you is that if the Democrats gain control over the Senate, the first order of business will be a massive stimulus bill to protect desperate working people throughout this country. We have seen just the other day in New York City, 1.5 million people are struggling to put food on the table. This is obscene. First order of business for a Democratic Senate will be to protect the working class of this country with a very, very strong stimulus bill.
But, Senator, do you think that people can wait that long?
Well, no. I mean, I would like to see a bill passed today. As you know, the House of Representatives passed the HEROES Act over 5 months ago. And all that McConnell has to do is to allow us to vote and give us some support for that bill, and we can go a long way to addressing the crises facing working families.
Yeah. Let's turn now to the presidential race. Obviously, the election is less than 2 weeks away now. What's your message to the young people, many of whom supported you, who, they don't like Donald Trump. They hear, the rhetoric and they see the threat that he poses to the country, but they're reluctant to vote for a candidate in Joe Biden who, frankly, supported the Iraq War, who helped author the crime bill, who still supports the bad trade deals like NAFTA and TPP that have sent our jobs overseas. What is your affirmative case for Joe Biden to those young voters who are still skeptical?
Well, the affirmative case is severalfold. First of all, Trump must be defeated because we're not just talking about Trump's bad policies. We're talking about a literal threat to American democracy. You got a president who does not believe in the rule of law, who has suggested that he may not even leave office if he loses the election. Trump must be defeated, end of discussion. And if you care about climate change, if you care about racial justice, if you care about ending sexism, you got to vote for Joe Biden. Second of all, if you look at Biden's economic proposals, they're not Bernie Sanders' proposals. Don't want to suggest they are. But they will raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour, equal pay for equal work, making it easier for workers to join unions, $2 trillion investment in combating climate change and creating millions of good-paying jobs in energy efficiency and sustainable energy, paid family and medical leave, no small things. Third point that I would make, Joe Biden is not going to become the dictator. He is the president of the United States. If we rally the American people and demand that Congress stand up and fight for workers and have the courage to take on the big money interests in the insurance industry, in the pharmaceutical industry, in the fossil fuel industry, in the prison industrial complex. You know what? We can transform this country. But if Trump is reelected, all that we're going to be on for the next 4 years is defensive procedures. I want to get on the offensive. And that is why, in my view, every progressive, every person in this country who thinks for 2 minutes about what's at stake should be voting for Joe Biden.
So let's talk about what that would look like under a potential Biden administration, because this is something that I've heard from you and a lot of others. Okay, we're going to have an opportunity to push Joe Biden to the left. What does that specifically look like in practice? What would some of the red lines be for you? And if he falls short in your measure in terms of fighting for working class citizens of this country, would you be open to supporting a primary challenge either against him or against Senator Harris in 2024?
Those are great questions, Crystal. Let me start off by saying that I don't think the progressives within the Congress can do it alone. So the first point that has to be made, and I'm going to make this over and over again, if you want a progressive agenda to come out of the United States Congress, we're going to have to rally the American people by the tens of millions to demand that we have a government that represents all of us and not just wealthy campaign contributors. We're going to have to correct and deal with a very corrupt election system with massive voter suppression that exists every single day right now. Second of all, what we are going to do is I'm going to lay out a 100-day agenda which speaks to the need to begin the process of moving toward Medicare for all. My legislation, 4-year legislation, first year lower the eligibility age from 65 to 55 and cover all the kids. I'm going to introduce that bill. Immediately, we're going to raise that minimum wage to $15 an hour, equal pay for equal work. Immediately, a massive infrastructure program to rebuild our crumbling infrastructure and create millions of good-paying jobs. Immediately, making it easier for workers to join unions, et cetera, et cetera. So we have got to lay out an agenda that speaks to the struggles and the desperation of working class Americans. And finally, tell the corporate elite they have had their day. And we are going to stand up and fight for policies that workers desperately need.
So I want to make sure I'm understanding you here.
Am I prepared to support primary challenges all across this country to those members of Congress, Democrats, who are not prepared to move toward a progressive agenda? You're damn right I am.
And so let me make sure I understand what you're saying here. You're saying, look, the Biden administration, they'll have their 100-day plan, but there's going to be a Bernie Sanders working class 100-day plan as well that you're going to attempt to rally people behind.
You got it.
Got it.
It's exactly what we're going to do. And I think the plan that we're talking about, my opponents say we're radical. We're not radical. We're finally going to address the long ignored crises facing working families, where half of our people before the pandemic were living paycheck to paycheck. 90 million Americans have no health insurance or are underinsured, and we have massive income and wealth inequality. The American people want action. They do not want us to go back to business as usual. 87-point programs taken over a 12-year period. We got to move, and we got to move aggressively.
Yeah. And Senator Sanders, you have been traveling the country. You've been working very hard, campaigning very hard for former Vice President Joe Biden to get him elected. What are you hearing from people? And also, has this time period with the pandemic and the economic fallout from that pandemic and the soaring inequality that we've seen associated with all of that, has it changed your view in any way about the policy prescriptions and the size and scope of the challenge and what's required right now?
Look, right now, the working class of this country is facing more desperation than it has since the Great Depression. And what also troubles me is not just the reality of economic desperation, hunger, unemployment, low-income workers, people without health care. What troubles me is that so many people have given up on the political process, are so alienated from the political process that they believe incredibly crazy conspiracy theories. So when I talk about an agenda that speaks to the needs of working families, it's not just economic, it's not just racial justice, it's not just climate change. It is making people all over this country understand that we hear their pain, that in a democratic society, government has the capability of responding to their needs, to explain to them why the rich are getting richer, why large corporations are able to throw Americans out on the street and move to low-wage countries. But this moment is not only a moment in which we deal with the economic crisis, we have got to deal with the existential crisis of so many of our people giving up on their government and giving up on democracy.
Yeah, I think that's well said. You know, Senator, you're probably familiar with my political beliefs, very, much aligned with your view of the country and what needs to be done. And so as I've been looking at the moves that the Biden campaign and potential Biden administration are making, looking for signs of, what direction they would potentially go in, I've seen some frankly troubling things. One of the news reports that just came out from Politico laid out the number of Republicans that are being vetted for that administration, people who are quite extreme in terms of their economic views, like John Kasich, like former Senator Jeff Flake, like Meg Whitman. And yet, is there a single person who endorsed you or is aligned with your vision who's being vetted or considered for a Biden administration? If not, why not?
Crystal, you're going to forgive me for not, going too much into the details on this. The answer to your question is yes, there are. But the main point that I would make is that some of my friends in the Democratic establishment are not aware, or I think cannot comprehend what some of us have in mind in terms of what will happen after Biden is elected, hopefully after he's elected. And that is, we are not going back to business as usual. There's too much pain out there. There's too much inequality out there. There's too much injustice out there. And here is what I believe from the bottom of my heart. If the Democrats, with the Democratic president, Democratic House, and Democratic Senate, cannot begin to address the real crises facing this country, then the future of this nation will be very, very dismal indeed. The people are giving us an opportunity now, and if we blow it by not being bold and aggressive, the next Trump who comes along will be even worse than this one. So this is a moment to restore faith in the American people, in their government, and I'm going to do everything I can to fight for an agenda by which they're saying, well, you know what? It looks like the United States government is finally listening to us. They're no longer ignoring us. That is what we have got to do.
The polls have Joe Biden up significantly nationally. They give him an edge in all the major battleground states. I actually was just looking at a Quinnipiac poll that has him tied even in a place like Texas. How realistic do you think that some of those stretch states like Texas or Iowa are for the Biden campaign? And what's your sense generally of how this election is going and what we can expect?
Crystal, I'm not much into political speculation. I'm just working hard and doing the best that I can do, and we'll see what happens on election night. Texas, to me, is an interesting state, and we have now done 3 events, virtual events, in Texas. And I think Texas has the capability of being a transformative state for American politics. Because as you know, historically, because of massive voter suppression in Texas, they continuously have one of the lowest voter turnouts of any state in the country. That's beginning to change. People are getting registered to vote, the Latino population, the young people, African-American community, getting more involved in the political process. We are supporting 3 great progressive candidates for Congress in Texas. Each of them has a shot to win if the turnout is high. So we're putting a lot of effort into Texas. And if Texas does go for Biden, clearly the election will be over. It will be a landslide victory. In terms of other states, I mean, what we're seeing is polling which suggests that races are within the margin of error. We will see what happens. But all I can say to the viewers is do not become overly confident. That's the worst thing you could do. Do everything you can, not only to vote, but to bring out 3 of your friends, 5 of your friends, and make sure they vote as well. I have the feeling this will be, in many states, a very close election.
And finally, Senator, last question to you. And I ask this not as, looking back and woulda, coulda, shoulda, but as a way of learning lessons to build successful progressive movements and campaigns moving forward. There have been 1,000 postmortems of your campaign, and I think people feel particularly heartbroken right now looking at the economic pain, looking at the fallout, and understanding that you had that large-scale vision that could have really addressed working people's concerns, especially right now in this moment. Is there anything that you would do differently going back and thinking about the campaign? Any missteps, any regrets that you have in that regard? Again, as a way of sort of building and learning lessons for the future.
Crystal, very good question. Let's have that discussion after Election Day. How's that?
All right. I will look forward to that. Senator Sanders, thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you.
We'll have more Rising for you after this.